Hello everyone, I'm seeing a few of you pop in here now. So I am going to be starting step 2 of my process of painting this Anise in Dapple Gray. So earlier this week I did this first layer here, just giving her a very rough gray base coat. And I'm going to now start blocking in the dapples. So this layer is actually pretty rough too, usually. It's just that first step in really, like I said, mapping out the dapples. So I have my reference photos up here. So I have a variety of them, different horses, but all with very similar coloring. There are things I like about each of them that I'm going to incorporate. But it's important to have some really clear references so that you can really study the pattern and the way the dapples are placed. So for example, really pay attention to how the size changes depending on placement, how closely they're grouped together, how the shape changes, where they'll start to get real star-shaped and spidery versus, you know, a little more rounded and boxy. It also not only does that vary from horse to horse, but it varies, you know, throughout the coat of each individual horse. So the more you paint, the more you'll start to see those patterns, but it's still important for everyone that you do to rely on a specific pattern or a few patterns that are very close to each other. So those are my references there. I have my colors already mixed. I'm working with again using bone black and titanium white. I have a dark mix that's just the two of those. Then I'm not quite sure how it's going to translate on the model just yet, so I also mixed a similar shade, adding just a touch of burnt umber. So that will just warm it up a tiny bit in case it's pulling too cool on the model. Then I also have I don't lay my dapples in white ever, and I have that mix there to show you what it's going to look like when you put it on the model, how cool it's going to pull. So instead I have this mid-tone mixed up. It's still pretty light, but definitely not as light as pure white, and I have mixed in it black, and instead of doing just black, because again that's going to go really cool, I added some burnt umber and yellow ochre to warm it up just a little bit. Okay, so let's see here. Put this back on my tripod, and we'll see how long I'll last like this. I'm trying a little bit different setup so I can watch your comments as I'm working. So my camera is right in front of me. We'll see if it gets in my way or not. So pull her off of here, and I'm going to, I mentioned last time that with Dapple Grays, I like to work in shifts, like front end, middle, back, etc. So I'm going to be starting on her neck and shoulder. So, and as far as my brushes, again, I'm using the silver whites. I'm going to start with the long handled 6 just to block in the color. And I'm going to start with just the straight black and white mix that I created and see how that lays down. Another important note, and I'll explain why, or I guess I'll explain why now. So the dark color that I mix, so whatever color is surrounding the dapples, I usually mix in a little bit more medium, and my medium again is refined linseed oil with a little bit of Galkid light. So I never go more than, say 50-50 on the ratio paint to medium. But more often, I mean, it's much less than that. For the dark, so that color that's going to be surrounding the dapples, I put a little bit more medium in, just so that it lays down a little bit thinner. Then the color that I'm going to use to place the dapples, I don't put quite as much in, so that it's just a little thicker so it doesn't blend quite as easily into the ground. I still want it to blend into it, but not so easily that they disappear. So I'm putting this all over, so I'm never painting around, or at least at this stage I'm never painting around dapples. And actually I think that's okay. I don't think it's pulling too cool yet. As you start to go lighter, that's when these mixes will pull even cooler. And now that this is my second layer, fortunately, I will not have to fight that strange, really fast drying situation that happens when I paint directly onto the primer. And I've also, side note, I've also tried solving that problem by spraying some sealer on before doing my first layer of oils, and I still get the same issue. So whatever it is, it's how the paint interacts with the either primer or sealer. So I don't know what that is. But anyhow, do you prefer linseed versus something like walnut oil? I've actually never used walnut oil, so I don't know. Maybe it is something that I would like more. Do you use walnut oil? If you do, let me know if there's something about it that you like more. Might be something I need to try out. So on this layer, I'm getting a little bit more refined with my placement of colors, but I still don't need to be super perfect about it. Okay, so now I'll go sort of section by section. Well, actually, no, let me go down to the shoulder. So I can already see that this Dapple Gray is, I've never done quite this shade. There's a lot of really distinct variation in the size and shape of the dapples. It's going to be a bit of a mental exercise, more than I'm used to. I'm using oil paints, and these are Daniel Smith and Winsor Newton. I use some of both. Oh, the walnut oil yellows less. Yeah, that might be true. It probably is. I've never had any issue with yellowing in any of my models or in my 2D painting yet. But to be fair, nothing is more than like 10 years old. So I think often the yellowing, it may be in terms of decades more so. I don't know, it'd be an interesting thing to experiment with. Okay, so now that I have, let me see if I missed something else here. Okay, so now that I have this ground down. So it's pretty thin. Let me position here. I'm going to block in the dapples. And I'm going to show you really quickly how stark and blue just this white is going to look here. Versus now, admittedly, this shade of gray is a much more blue-toned, cool-toned gray, but even so, it's possible I got my warm mix just a little bit too warm. I don't know if you can tell very clearly there. But the one is a much more neutral tone versus this very blue cast that one has. I also don't like making as big of jumps. So even if I had mixed this, a pure black and white mixture, I would still want to use like a medium or light gray versus straight white, because I'll be building layers in the dapples. And so I want to start darker and build lighter, so I really get that effect of the white herring over top as I go. Okay, so now and actually I don't even like the placement of those, so I'm going to buff those out. So that's the beauty of working in oils, that I can very easily come back in with the dark and essentially erase them out if I don't like them. Okay, so for my dapples, I'm using the silver white short handle, and I may end up jumping, actually I think I'm going to do the 2 for a little more precision. And I just sort of find a clear anchor point on the reference in the model, somewhere that sort of makes sense for me to start at. So I don't necessarily paint my dapple grays dapple by dapple, or I don't match my reference dapple to dapple. But if I get a general sense of the size and placement and number of dapples and start paying close attention to the patterns. And I also mention the way that I'm doing the dapples. Most dapples are not really truly round in shape. They're more of a star shape of some sorts. Of course, some much more dramatic than others. But because of that, I like to make my dapples, instead of drawing circles, I draw X's or stars or something. So I draw a little X like that, and that will be my dapple. Of course, always paying attention that I vary. I don't want the angles to always be the same. So I'll kind of twist and turn the way the points are pointing, and also change the number as I see they change. So up here in the neck, they seem to be a little bit more strictly a simple sort of X shape. Whereas once I get down on the shoulder, they start branching off a little more, and they might have like a 5-point star or something like that. So also look for irregularity even within these X and star shapes. Do some of them have like a longer tail at some point? Anytime you can build in randomness and irregularity, it's going to look much more authentic. This is a very slow and tedious part of both the painting and the tutorial. So I'm seeing where they're starting to get a little bit larger. Yes, the refinement comes at a later stage. I'll be doing at least probably 2 more layers after this, and there'll be much more detailed layers. So this layer, I'm really just like giving myself a roadmap for the detail in later layers. And you also do not need to worry about these looking perfect. I'm actually going much more slowly this time because of how much variation I'm seeing in this pattern. Often I will go much more quickly throughout the pattern because I just sort of get a feel for the placement. And you also don't need to be precise and neat. So my slowness right now is not about being precise and neat. It's more just really focusing. Because after I place these, I am going to buff them out just a little bit. And that buffing is really the main reason I do that, is to make sure I don't have any of those brush marks. The visible raised brush marks. But also it does blend them into the coat a little bit more and eliminate any hard edges. I'm going to eventually have some harder edges because of how contrasty this gray is, but I want them to be more controlled hard edges that are created with more of a hair-like pattern than just these distinct hard dapple shapes. Yes, I do the same thing for other dapple colors, not just grays. It does vary a little bit more because most other dappled colors do not have quite as much texture in the way that the white hairs are blended into the coat, giving like that Roni effect. Some of them definitely are, but some of them are much more smooth look to the dapples. But I would still build them the same way. I would probably focus on then blending them out a little bit more after this layer. And then depending on the color, I do work, so sometimes I'll just build dapples over top, but I usually do work a little bit back and forth at some point towards the later stages where I'll also blend in some of the color between the dapples where it needs to be, where areas need to be darker, etc. Yes, this is oil paint. Once I start to get a feel for the pattern of the dapples in an area, I might and like start to get some specific reference to model Dapple's placed exactly, I might start looking at the model in and of itself and see if it looks like there are any awkward spaces or gaps that I could fill in. If it ever starts to look too uniform in any way, you can always break it up. I might break it up with like adding in like a little tiny one somewhere, as long as that's consistent with the sort of things that happen on the model. So like if it starts to look awkward, think about how what your shapes are like, if they need to change at all, if you need more variety there, if you need more variety in the size, if you get any funny lines. And what I mean, like where it looks like there's a line of dapples. Now right here, some places the reference actually looks like it has more of a line. So there was like a line of dapples that traced along underneath her mane. So I replicated those. So now down here where it's really, they get really thin and spidery, I'm going to draw them in as such. And again, that looks really harsh right now, but it'll soften out. It's okay to just get the main feel of it for now. And as you move to a different area, watch the size, see how the size of the dapples change. Make sure you're consistent with that. Now we're getting into a really funky area right here. Sometimes you'll see that these star dapples almost look like they're made up of little tiny clusters of dapples. I'm reading this question. When doing a sooty dapple on a light base, do you still block in and paint the body color over? Or are there color considerations for hue shifts? So I essentially do the same thing, but yes, it definitely gets more complicated in the way the colors change. So just like with painting this white over top of the gray, I had to compensate for the fact that it's going to shift and look cooler in tone. When you're working within colors outside of just gray, then you not only have warm and cool to deal with, but you're working with a wider spectrum of color shifts. So yes, that's definitely something to take in consideration, and it just depends model to model. Try a color if it feels wrong, adjust it as needed, and you can also definitely adjust in later layers as needed. It's always good to get as close as possible in the first layer, but sometimes you can expect to just know that you have to do some shifting later on. you're not going to get it exactly right in the first layer. So hopefully after this one, I can save the video as soon as I end and not go through what I did with the first one. There's apparently a super small window just right after, or I guess it's not a small window, it's just the first screen that you see after you end the live. That's the only chance you get to save it. So I will have to do that this time and not have to do the screen capture. Have a little bit of a cleaner upload to YouTube. Yeah, I was able to get the first one, only I wasn't able to actually save it. I had to do a screen recording of the video, so it's a little choppy and, or not choppy, I had to do it in 3 parts because I also couldn't stop notifications from coming through on my phone. Because I tried putting it in airplane mode, but then if it's in airplane mode, I can't access the Instagram Live. So it's in pieces and it's a little less clean because all of the comments are coming through, but I mean, I guess maybe that's not a bad thing if the comments are coming through. But it was also a hassle to do that, so I will hopefully be able to save this one the right way this time. So you can see here's one where sometimes when they get bigger, they become more like star shapes rather than just X's. Yes, different dapples will definitely get lighter in different areas of the horse, but I'm not addressing that just at this layer. This layer, I'm just getting the placement in. I'll create that variation as I get into more detailed layers later. So I think for me, it's a lot easier to focus on fewer things at once. So placement of the dapples is enough of a mental exercise that I don't want to have to also worry about like the colors so much or the herring detail, etc. Okay, just about there with the shoulder, and then I'll buff it out and probably end the live video for now, because this is not exciting to just watch me place all of these dapples. Yes, I use medium and dryers. So usually what I do is whatever dryer I'm using, I mix a small amount into my medium so that I can control it a little bit more and keep it consistent. So I've used in the past a lot of cobalt blue dryer. So I'll use linseed oil or whatever oil you prefer and add a drop or so of the dryer to my linseed oil and then add that mixture to my paint. I've just started trying linseed oil mixed with Galkid Light, which is another medium. It's not specifically a dryer, but it is a drying medium. So that has helped to speed things as well. Sometimes cobalt dryer can be a little bit too extreme in how fast it will dry, especially if you get too much. You can start getting tacky almost immediately, which is usually not good. Might not be a bad thing to cover also, since there's not much else to talk about right now while I finish this out. Cleanup for oils. So you do need to have a like a mineral spirits or turpentine or something like that to clean oils. So that will get the oil out of your paintbrush. If you only ever clean your brushes with that, your brushes will not last as long and they will pretty easily get kind of hard after a painting session. So I wash my brushes as well using, you can use, and of course now I'm forgetting the brand. You can get specific paintbrush cleaners, and I've used them and like them, but I also really like Murphy's oil soap. It cleans and conditions the brushes pretty well, and you can also say if you don't have time to actually wash your brushes out after a painting session, or if you have forgotten your brushes and let paint dry on them, you can fill or you can put your brushes upside down in it. So I just like fill the Murphy's oil up right past the bristles, and you can soak them in there. And if they have dried on paint, sometimes they are actually salvageable after a nice soak in straight Murphy's oil soap. So that's a fun little hack. And yeah, it keeps the brushes nice and conditioned. So I think I saw a couple of questions. Is Galkid less toxic than cobalt dryer? It might be. I haven't looked into that closely. I know cobalt dryer is a pretty nasty substance to work with. I'm never getting it on my hands. That's why I wear the glove like this. But yeah, it's very possible. Good primers for acrylics. I can't even remember what primer I use right now. I should know this. I don't have my primers here right with me to read, but I use the same primer, acrylic or oil or pastels. There's actually a new one that I think I've used the Rust-Oleum, and I know a lot of people hate them, think they're too thick, or they spray on too thick, or they're unpredictable. I've not had any trouble with them. I actually like the nice coverage. But I also recently tried another brand, and I can't remember the brand. If I find I'll post about it. But yeah, like I said, I don't have them in front of me to remember what they're called. Another thing, talking about toxicity, if you don't like the smell of mineral spirits, Gamblin also makes a, I'm assuming it's a less toxic because it's non-flammable mineral spirits called Gamsol, and I've actually also just started using that as well, and have liked it so far. Even odorless mineral spirits are not truly odorless, but I think I've found the Gamsol to actually be pretty odorless. Okay. I think I've just about got this where I want it. Okay, so now that I've got those placed, is Dapple Gray my signature color? I don't think that I do have one. It is one of my favorites, so I guess I do a lot, and more often than not, a commission is in a Dapple Gray of some sort. So, okay, so now that I've got these placed, I'm just going to take again one of my mop brushes. This is Winsor & Newton mops. This is a size 5/8, so I like using the 5/8 and the little bit bigger 3/4. So I'm just going to take this, and I'm working much more lightly so that I don't want to obliterate my dapples. I just want to make sure that any texture is removed and sink them into the coat just a little bit. So when you do this, whatever color you have is going to get a little bit lighter, or I mean, whatever color the dapples are going to get a little bit darker, I guess is what I mean. They're not going to keep quite that contrast as they pick up and blend with the color underneath. But the way that I made my base layer a little bit thinner than my dapples, the dapples didn't have quite as much medium, so they're a little thicker. That helps combat that. If my lighter dapple color was very thin, these would blend out super easily, but because I made it a little bit thicker, the paint a little stickier, they stay in place a little bit better. Okay, so that is how I go about working that first layer of dapples, and then I would flip her over and do the same thing on this neck and shoulder. I might actually also take it down the leg too, a little bit. And then I might as well show you a little bit about how I do the work on the face as well. Okay. Yes, this is Anise by Jennifer Scott. Okay, I am going to use this a little bit more brown toned gray for her muzzle. Actually crank this down a little bit. So I'm also, again, keeping the oils pretty thin, only getting small amounts. You can see I'm never like just dipping straight into that. I'm just more catching the edge and making sure it's well dispersed because I don't want to put any globs of paint on the model. I'd rather just buff the color in to keep it smooth and even. You can see how blotchy this, sorry, see I'm totally out of the frame now, how blotchy this color was. I guess it's not showing up terribly blotchy there, but just a single layer over top is pretty much evening that out. So once I have that layer of the darker color put in, I'm going to start transitioning this, making a smoother transition to the white of the face. And I am going to try my warm mixture. Same thing where I make sure I do not have much paint at all on my brush. And I just start slowly working into the edge of the darker color. And this will usually, an extreme transition like this, where we go from a very dark gray muzzle to a near white gray face, will probably take a couple of layers to get a really nice seamless transition. Okay, so once I have that transition color placed, I then go for, I should have a mix instead of just using straight white. So I'm going to, I don't typically recommend this, and I don't typically do this where I mix it with my brush. But I just want a tiny bit. Actually, I want that thinned out. So even though her face is almost white, I'm not gonna mix. I don't wanna put just white on it. I would rather start a little bit darker and then in later layers kind of work over top with something, with the lighter whites, to get just a hint of a hair texture. Let's see if I can turn this around. So you can see it's much easier to blend that mid-tone into the dark and then blend this light into the mid-tone than trying to blend the light straight into the dark. And I do the same thing around the eye, where I'll start with the dark and then give it a little bit of a rim of a mid-tone and then build into the light. And then once I have the color down, when there's this much contrast, you still need to take a soft brush to it, but I do so very, very carefully. Get a clean one if you need to. I also sometimes, for areas like this, I'll get a smaller, more precise one. So this one's pretty soft too. It's not quite as soft and fluffy as these mops, but it's not as stiff as these. What's this one? It's also a Winsor Newton. Doesn't say, tell me what shape it is. But you can see that it's a little flatter. It's kind of like a flat version of those mops. So you could also use this to take around the edges to get a little bit more precise blending, instead of taking the mop over the entire thing. And then as I go into the face, I'd definitely get a clean one so I'm not putting that dark paint into it. Mop brushes to stay fluffy. And is this a filbert? This one doesn't, I mean, yeah, it is a filbert-like shape, but I don't know, it also says series 210. I don't know if that means anything. It doesn't say filbert or anything on it. It seems slightly different. I'm not sure. But how to keep them fluffy, I think washing them with the Murphy's oil soap keeps them really clean and keeps that fluffiness. Okay. So I will leave it at that for now. Let's see, any more questions before I hop off? Okay, well, thanks again for coming and hanging out and sticking around, if any of you did stick around for all of this. And yes, I will save this and upload it to YouTube. So yeah, thanks for watching.